It was an ordinary day, or at least it seemed like one. In the high-rise building, the hum of office chatter, the clicking of keyboards, and the constant bustle of the workplace created a familiar rhythm. People were walking to and from meetings, discussing deals and working on their computers. It was a world where success was measured by deals made, profits earned, and the constant pursuit of excellence. Among the employees in this corporate empire was a young woman who had recently joined the company as an assistant. She wasn't used to the fast-paced life of high-end business, but she was learning quickly. Every day, she found herself surrounded by the kind of luxury that few people would ever experience. The walls were lined with art from the world's most famous artists. The offices were equipped with the best technology money could buy, and the food served in the break room was gourmet. The woman had always been dedicated to her work. She came early, stayed late, and made sure everything was done to perfection. She was good at her job, but she was also new to this world. Her background was different from the high-powered executives she worked alongside. But she was determined to prove herself, to show that she belonged here, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone. One afternoon, her boss, the billionaire who ran the entire company, asked her to do something that would change the course of her day. It was a simple request. He needed her to help prepare for a meeting that would take place later in the week. She wasn't surprised. He was known for making last-minute decisions, and she had learned to expect the unexpected. But there was one detail that caught her off guard. The billionaire's mother was going to visit. She had heard about the woman before. The billionaire had mentioned her a few times in passing, but not much was known about her. He had said that his mother was a kind and quiet person, someone who preferred to stay out of the limelight. But there was something else he mentioned that made the assistant take notice. His mother was deaf. She had been deaf for as long as anyone could remember, and she communicated with people using sign language. The assistant had no experience with sign language. She knew a few basic gestures from school, but that was about it. Still, she wasn't about to let that stop her. If she was going to interact with the billionaire's mother, she wanted to do it right. The billionaire had warned her not to worry too much about it. He said that his mother was used to people not knowing how to communicate with her, so she didn't expect anyone to try. But the assistant knew better. She didn't want to just be another person who ignored or avoided his mother because of her deafness. She wanted to make a real effort to do something that would stand out. So, as the day went on, the assistant found herself trying to recall the basic signs she had learned. She practiced silently at her desk, her fingers moving through the air, trying to remember how to say hello and nice to meet you in sign language. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that afternoon, the billionaire's mother arrived. The assistant didn't know what to expect. She had imagined an elderly woman with a quiet, dignified presence, someone who would be just as refined as the rest of the company's elite. But when the woman entered the lobby, she was different from what the assistant had imagined. The billionaire's mother was elegant, yes, but there was also a warmth to her that made her stand out. She was dressed in a simple but beautiful outfit, and her smile radiated kindness. She wasn't someone who seemed out of place in a world of wealth and power. In fact, she seemed to belong there, despite the fact that she had spent her entire life in a world of silence. The assistant's heart raced as she watched the billionaire's mother step out of the elevator and into the lobby. The woman looked around, and the assistant couldn't help but notice how carefully she surveyed the room. She wasn't just looking at the people, she was also noticing how they looked at her. The assistant could see that the woman had spent years navigating a world where people didn't know how to interact with her, where they either ignored her or treated her differently because of her deafness. As the billionaire's mother approached, the assistant took a deep breath. She knew this was her moment to make a good impression, but what could she do? She didn't want to just smile and wave like everyone else. She had to do something that would show she was different, that she cared. And then, without thinking too much about it, the assistant did something she had never done before. She stepped forward and, with a quiet but confident gesture, signed the word hello in sign language. The billionaire's mother stopped. For a moment, the assistant was unsure whether she had done something wrong. Maybe the greeting was awkward, or maybe she had misused the sign. But then something amazing happened. The billionaire's mother's face lit up. She smiled, and the assistant could see the warmth in her eyes. The two women stood there for a moment, exchanging a quiet but meaningful look. The assistant felt a rush of relief flood through her. She had done it. She had made an effort and it had paid off. Without speaking, the billionaire's mother gestured for the assistant to follow her. They walked together to the office where the meeting would take place. As they moved through the building, the assistant couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had done something that no one else had done. She had connected with the billionaire's mother in a way that was real, that was personal. For the rest of the afternoon, the assistant helped the billionaire's mother get settled in. They communicated using simple signs. And though the assistant stumbled a few times, the billionaire's mother was patient and understanding. It was a world that the assistant had never experienced before, one where words weren't needed to bridge the gap between two people. In that moment, the assistant realized something important. Communication wasn't just about words. It was about connection, about making an effort to understand one another, even when the world around you didn't always make it easy. As the day went on, the assistant found herself becoming more and more comfortable with the signs. She learned a few more from the billionaire's mother, and by the time the meeting ended, they had built a small but meaningful rapport. The assistant had never felt so accomplished, so proud of herself for stepping outside of her comfort zone. The billionaire, who had been observing the interaction from afar, couldn't hide the smile on his face. He was surprised to see someone making such an effort to connect with his mother in a way that was genuine. His mother had spent most of her life navigating a world that often didn't know how to include her, and it meant a great deal to him to see that someone had made the effort to meet her where she was. As the day came to a close, the assistant knew that this would be a day she would remember forever. What had started as a simple greeting had turned into something far more profound. It was the beginning of a relationship built on empathy, respect, and understanding. Something that went beyond the luxury and power of the billionaire's world. In the quiet moments as the office emptied, the assistant couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. She had greeted the billionaire's mother in sign language, and that small gesture had opened up a door to something beautiful, something real. She couldn't wait to see where this new connection would take her. The next day, the assistant couldn't stop thinking about the meeting. What had started as a small, simple gesture had turned into something much more meaningful than she had expected. She had always believed that small acts of kindness could make a difference, but this experience made her realize just how powerful those acts could truly be. The greeting, which had felt like a simple courtesy at the time, had opened up a door between her and the billionaire's mother, one that the assistant knew she couldn't simply walk away from. As she sat at her desk, typing away on her computer, the memory of the day before kept replaying in her mind. The way the billionaire's mother had smiled when she signed hello, the warmth in her eyes, the unspoken connection that had passed between them. It was all so clear in her mind. The assistant had always prided herself on being efficient and professional, but now she realized that the connection she had made with the billionaire's mother was something that couldn't be measured by the usual standards of success. It wasn't about how fast she could type, how many tasks she could complete, or how well she could organize meetings. This was something deeper, something more personal. That morning, as she looked over her schedule, the assistant noticed that the billionaire's mother would be visiting again in a few days. There would be another meeting, and she would be expected to help once again. The thought of seeing her again made the assistant nervous, but it also filled her with a sense of anticipation. She wasn't sure exactly why, but something told her that this wasn't just another meeting. There was something about this connection that felt important, that felt like it could lead to something bigger. Over the next few days, the assistant spent her time preparing for the visit. She focused on making sure everything was in order for the meeting, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to be more prepared than just for the usual business matters. She had already made one connection with the billionaire's mother, and she wanted to make sure she didn't miss the chance to build on that. In the quiet moments between tasks, the assistant practiced her sign language. She had learned a few more words since their last meeting, and she was determined to improve. She would often stand in front of her mirror, silently practicing the signs she had learned. "Thank you," she would sign, then, "Nice to meet you." She even learned how to say, "How are you?" and "I'm happy to see you" in sign language. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The more she practiced, the more confident she became. She realized that this was more than just about communicating with the billionaire's mother. It was about showing her respect, about meeting her where she was and acknowledging her experience. In a world that often overlooked people with disabilities, The assistant wanted to make sure that the billionaire's mother didn't feel invisible. She didn't want to be just another person who spoke over her or ignored her. She wanted to be someone who took the time to understand, someone who cared enough to make an effort. When the day of the meeting arrived, the assistant was ready. She had practiced her signs, and though she was still a little nervous, she felt a sense of calm that came from knowing she was doing the right thing. She had prepared herself for the business side of things, but she knew that there was another, more personal side to this visit. She wasn't sure what would happen, but she was excited to see where this connection would go. As the billionaire's mother arrived at the office, the assistant was there to greet her. She stepped forward, just as she had done before, and greeted her with a smile and a simple hello in sign language. The billionaire's mother's eyes lit up at the gesture, and once again the assistant felt that warm, unspoken connection between them. This time, however, the interaction felt different. There was a sense of familiarity between them, a sense that they had crossed some invisible threshold that had made their relationship feel more genuine. The billionaire's mother gestured for the assistant to follow her as they made their way to the conference room. As they walked through the halls, the assistant couldn't help but feel like the walls were closing in. There was something about the energy in the building that made her feel a little overwhelmed. She had always been someone who thrived in quiet spaces, and now, as she walked alongside the billionaire's mother, the weight of the situation seemed to press on her. The billionaire's mother, however, seemed unfazed. She moved through the building with grace, her movements fluid and purposeful. The assistant noticed that she wasn't distracted by the chaos around her. She was calm, centered, and completely in control of herself. The assistant admired that. In a world where so many people rushed from one task to the next, the billionaire's mother moved through life with a quiet confidence that was almost contagious. When they reached the conference room, the assistant set to work, helping the billionaire's mother get settled in. They communicated with simple signs, and though there were a few moments where the assistant wasn't sure she had signed correctly, the billionaire's mother was patient, smiling, and offering small corrections when needed. It wasn't long before the assistant felt more at ease. The conversation flowed naturally, and even though they weren't speaking in the traditional sense, they were still able to understand one another perfectly. Throughout the meeting, the billionaire's mother remained calm and composed, occasionally signing to the assistant when she needed something. The assistant, though still a little nervous, was able to follow along. There were moments where she would look at the billionaire's mother and feel a sense of awe at how easily they communicated. It wasn't the words that mattered. It was the connection, the understanding that passed between them. As the meeting came to an end, the billionaire's mother turned to the assistant, smiling. She signed a simple thank you, and the assistant responded with a smile and a wave, signing, "You're welcome." It wasn't much, but in that small exchange, the assistant felt a sense of pride. She had connected with someone in a way that most people never even considered, and it had made all the difference. Later, as the assistant was sitting at her desk, the billionaire came over to thank her for her efforts. He had been observing the meeting from his office and had seen how well the assistant had interacted with his mother. He was genuinely surprised by how well it had gone. Most people had never bothered to make the effort to communicate with his mother in a way that was both meaningful and respectful. The assistant had done something that few people ever did, and it had left an impression on him. "I didn't expect you to make such an effort," the billionaire said, his voice full of gratitude. "My mother really appreciates it. You've done something that means a lot to her and to me." The assistant smiled, a little embarrassed by the compliment. She hadn't expected anything in return. She had simply wanted to make a connection, to show respect to someone who had spent so much of her life feeling isolated. "Thank you," the assistant said softly. "It was my pleasure. She's a wonderful person, and I wanted to make sure I was doing my part." The billionaire nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You did more than your part. You did something that most people wouldn't even think of doing. I'm grateful." As the assistant went back to her desk, she couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just another day at the office. It had become something much more significant. It was about making a real connection with someone, about stepping outside of her comfort zone to show kindness and respect. In a world that often overlooked people with disabilities, she had done something small but meaningful to make sure the billionaire's mother didn't feel invisible. And as she sat there, reflecting on the experience, she realized that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to learn, so much more to explore. And in that moment, she knew that her relationship with the billionaire's mother wasn't just a fleeting interaction. It was the start of something lasting, something that would shape her understanding of the world in a way she never expected. As the days passed, the assistant found herself growing more and more comfortable with the idea of communicating through sign language. It wasn't something she had expected to become so deeply involved with, but the more she practiced and interacted with the billionaire's mother, the more she realized just how much it meant to her. The connection they shared wasn't just about business, it was personal, and the assistant could see that it was something the billionaire's mother had been missing in her life. Real, genuine communication. The next visit was coming up soon, and as much as the assistant looked forward to it, there was also a sense of nervousness. She wasn't sure what to expect this time. Would the conversation flow as smoothly as it had before? Would the billionaire's mother still be as warm and receptive? The assistant wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. She wanted to be ready. She had made a promise to herself that she would continue to improve, to learn more, and to make the effort to bridge the gap between herself and the billionaire's mother. Over the next few days, she spent every spare moment practicing. She worked on more complex signs, trying to expand her vocabulary. She learned how to ask about someone's family, how to express gratitude in different ways, and how to describe how she was feeling. The more she practiced, the more she felt like she was truly communicating, not just with words, but with her actions, her gestures, and her heart. Each time she learned a new sign, she couldn't wait to use it. The assistant had always been someone who worked hard, who strived for perfection in everything she did. But this felt different. This wasn't about perfection, it was about connection. It was about showing someone that they mattered, that their way of communicating was just as important as anyone else's. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. The assistant had prepared herself as much as she could. She had practiced her signs, reviewed her notes, and even learned a few new phrases that she hoped would help the conversation go smoothly. She knew that it wasn't going to be easy, but she was determined to do her best. When the billionaire's mother arrived, the assistant was ready. She greeted her with a smile and a simple hello in sign language, just as she had done before. The billionaire's mother smiled back, her eyes lighting up as she signed something in response. The assistant understood, and she signed back with the new phrase she had learned, "How are you today?" The conversation flowed from there. The billionaire's mother signed that she was feeling well, and the assistant signed back asking about her day. They spoke in short, simple sentences, but there was something beautiful about the way they communicated. It wasn't about the words, they were just a tool. What mattered was the way they understood each other, the way their gestures and expressions conveyed meaning beyond what could be spoken aloud. As the conversation continued, the assistant began to feel a sense of pride. She had come so far in such a short time. Just a few weeks ago, she had been nervous about speaking with the billionaire's mother, unsure of how to communicate with someone who had spent most of her life in silence. Now she was able to converse with her with relative ease, and the feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming. At one point, the billionaire's mother smiled and signed, "You're doing well. I can see you've been practicing." The assistant blushed a little at the compliment, signing back, "I want to make sure I'm communicating with you the way you deserve." The billionaire's mother's smile grew wider, and the assistant could see that she was genuinely touched. In that moment, the assistant realized just how much her efforts meant to the billionaire's mother. It wasn't just about the signs she was learning or the words she was saying. It was about the respect she was showing by taking the time to learn, to understand, and to connect. For the rest of the meeting, the assistant focused on helping the billionaire's mother with everything she needed. They communicated seamlessly, moving from one topic to the next with ease. The assistant was amazed at how much they were able to share without needing to rely on words. There was a depth to the conversation that went beyond what could be expressed in a language made up of sounds. It was a connection that transcended the spoken word. As the meeting came to an end, the billionaire's mother signed a simple "thank you," and the assistant returned the gesture, smiling. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction as they parted ways. This wasn't just another day at the office, it was a day where real progress had been made, where a meaningful bond had been strengthened. The billionaire, who had been watching from his office, came over to thank the assistant. He had been impressed by how well the meeting had gone, and how naturally the assistant had communicated with his mother. He had always known that his mother had a unique way of seeing the world, but it was clear to him now that the assistant had made an effort that most people wouldn't have bothered to make. "You've done something truly special here," the billionaire said. "My mother doesn't often feel like people understand her, but you've shown her that you do. That means more to her and to me than you could ever know." The assistant smiled, a little embarrassed by the praise. She hadn't done anything extraordinary, she thought. She had simply tried to do the right thing, to communicate in a way that felt respectful and authentic. But hearing the billionaire's words made her realize just how much her efforts had meant. It wasn't just about learning sign language. It was about showing someone that they were seen, heard, and valued. After the billionaire left, the assistant sat back at her desk, reflecting on the day. She had come so far in such a short time. What had started as a simple gesture, greeting the billionaire's mother with a sign, had turned into something much deeper. It wasn't just about communication. It was about connection. It was about breaking down the walls that so often separated people and finding a way to truly understand one another. The assistant realized that she had learned something important over the past few weeks. She had learned that the world wasn't always as simple as it seemed. People communicated in many different ways, and sometimes the most meaningful conversations happened when no words were spoken at all. She had also learned that the effort to understand someone else, to see them for who they truly were, was always worth it. As she continued to work at her desk, she couldn't help but feel grateful for the opportunity to have met the billionaire's mother, for the chance to learn from her and for the bond they had formed. The assistant knew that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to learn, so much more to explore, and she was eager to continue growing both personally and professionally. And in the quiet moments, when she looked back on everything that had happened, the assistant realized that what she had gained was far more valuable than any task she could have completed, or any meeting she could have organized. She had gained a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly connect with someone. She had gained the knowledge that sometimes the most meaningful moments in life weren't the ones that were loud or dramatic. They were the quiet moments, the small gestures, the acts of kindness that made someone feel seen and valued. As the days turned into weeks, the assistant continued her work with the billionaire's mother, and each time they met, their connection grew stronger. It wasn't just about the words they signed. It was about the respect, the understanding, and the mutual appreciation they shared. And with every passing day, the assistant knew that this was a bond that would last far beyond the walls of the office, far beyond the limits of sign language. It was a bond that had been built on empathy, patience, and the willingness to connect on a human level. The days following the last meeting were filled with a sense of quiet reflection for the assistant. She had continued to work hard as usual, but now there was a sense of purpose behind everything she did. Her interactions with the billionaire's mother had become more than just a routine. They had become an opportunity for growth, not just in her professional life, but in her personal one as well. There was something about the way the billionaire's mother had responded to her efforts that made the assistant feel like she was on the right path. She had been nervous about learning sign language, unsure of how it would be received or whether it would truly make a difference. But each time she interacted with the billionaire's mother, she felt more confident and more connected. The small signs of gratitude, the smiles, the silent nods, they all spoke volumes, telling her that what she was doing mattered. As the assistant continued to practice her sign language, she realized that she wasn't just learning how to communicate in a different way. She was learning how to be more present, more attentive, and more empathetic. In the fast-paced world of business, it was easy to get caught up in the hustle, to focus only on the tasks that needed to be completed. But communicating with the billionaire's mother had taught her something more valuable: the power of truly listening. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk, reviewing some documents, her phone buzzed with a message from the billionaire. It was a simple text asking if she could meet him in his office. The assistant didn't think much of it at first. After all, she was used to receiving requests like this. But as she made her way to his office, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity. What could he want this time? When she entered the billionaire's office, he was sitting behind his desk, his usual composed demeanor in place. But there was something different about the way he looked at her this time. There was a hint of something more, something that made the assistant feel like this wasn't going to be just another typical conversation. "Thank you for meeting with me," the billionaire said, his voice calm. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." The assistant nodded, waiting for him to continue. She had no idea what was coming next, but she was ready to listen. "My mother has spoken very highly of you," the billionaire began, his tone softening. "She told me how much you've helped her, how much effort you've put into learning sign language just to communicate with her." The assistant felt a warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't expected the billionaire to acknowledge her efforts in this way. She had simply been doing what felt right, but hearing his words made her realize how much of an impact she had truly made. "You've done something that most people don't even think about," he continued. "And for that I'm grateful. But more than that, my mother is grateful. She feels seen, heard, and respected, which is something that she doesn't always get from others." The assistant felt her heart swell with emotion. She had always believed that small acts of kindness mattered, but hearing it from the billionaire made it clear just how important her actions had been. It wasn't just about learning a new language, it was about making a real difference in someone's life. "I wanted to thank you," the billionaire said, looking directly at her. "And I wanted to make sure you know just how much this means to my family." The assistant was speechless for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She had never expected this kind of recognition, and it took her by surprise. But she quickly found her voice and smiled. "I'm just glad I could help," she said quietly. "It's been an honor to work with your mother. She's an incredible woman." The billionaire nodded, his expression softening further. "I know, and I'm grateful that you've taken the time to understand her, to communicate with her in a way that's meaningful. It's not something that everyone is willing to do." The conversation shifted from gratitude to business as the billionaire outlined a few tasks that the assistant needed to handle. But even as he spoke about the day's agenda, the assistant couldn't stop thinking about the words he had said. He had recognized her efforts, and in doing so, he had given her something more valuable than any task or project ever could, a sense of purpose and affirmation. As she returned to her desk and began to work, the assistant's thoughts were filled with a new sense of resolve. She had never been one to seek validation or praise, but the recognition she had received from the billionaire had strengthened her commitment to doing what was right. It wasn't just about completing the tasks assigned to her. It was about making a difference, no matter how small. A few days later, the assistant was in the break room when the billionaire's mother entered. The assistant had just finished preparing a report and was looking forward to a quiet moment when the older woman walked in. She smiled warmly when she saw the assistant, and without hesitation she signed, "Hello." The assistant smiled and greeted her back with the same sign, "Hello." There was an ease to the interaction now, a familiarity that had been built over time. The assistant felt a deep sense of connection, a feeling that came not just from the sign language they were using, but from the understanding that had grown between them. "Thank you," the billionaire's mother signed, her expression kind. "For everything." The assistant felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had done so much for the billionaire's mother, but it had never felt like a chore. It had always felt like something she was meant to do, something that came from the heart. Yet hearing the billionaire's mother express her gratitude in this way was humbling. "You're welcome," the assistant signed back, her fingers moving smoothly through the air. "It's my pleasure. I'm happy to help." The two women stood there for a moment, silently communicating in their shared language. It was a simple exchange, but to the assistant it meant everything. There was no need for words to express the depth of the connection between them. In that moment, the assistant realized that communication wasn't just about making sounds or learning signs. It was about understanding, about connecting with someone on a human level, regardless of the language they spoke. Over the next few weeks, the assistant continued to build on her relationship with the billionaire's mother. Each meeting was an opportunity to learn something new, to deepen their connection. The billionaire's mother had become not just a figure in the office, but a real person with her own stories, experiences, and emotions. And the assistant had become someone who could truly listen and understand. The more they communicated, the more the assistant realized that she had gained something far more valuable than any new skill or accomplishment. She had gained the ability to see people for who they really were, to understand them beyond their surface-level traits, and in doing so, she had built a connection that went beyond the confines of the office and into the realm of true friendship. As the months went by, the assistant found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She had started out as someone who simply wanted to do her job well, but now she understood the power of empathy, the value of kindness, and the importance of truly seeing and hearing the people around her. And all of this had come from a simple gesture, a sign language greeting that had opened the door to something far greater. One afternoon, the assistant sat at her desk, finishing up a project when the billionaire came by again. This time he was holding a small box wrapped in a neat ribbon. "I wanted to give you this," he said, his voice sincere, "as a token of appreciation for all the work you've done, not just for me, but for my mother." The assistant looked at the box in surprise, unsure of what to say. "You've done something no one else has been able to do," the billionaire continued. "You've made my mother feel seen, and that's something that means more to her than anything." With a mixture of humility and gratitude, the assistant accepted the gift. As she opened the box, she found a beautiful bracelet, delicate and elegant. It wasn't an extravagant gift, but it was thoughtful and meaningful. The assistant knew that it represented more than just a gesture. It represented the connection she had built with the billionaire's mother and the impact she had made on her life. "I don't know what to say," the assistant said quietly. Touched by the gesture, the billionaire smiled. "You don't need to say anything. You've already done more than enough." The weeks that followed were filled with a mix of reflection and growth. The assistant continued to build on her experiences, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment in her work. Her relationship with the billionaire's mother had become a cornerstone of her days, and each time they met, it felt like they were learning more about each other, sharing moments that transcended the walls of the office and the formalities of business. One of the most powerful things the assistant had learned during this time was the art of truly listening. She had always considered herself a good listener, but there was something different about listening to someone whose voice was silent. The billionaire's mother didn't need to speak to communicate. Her words came through her eyes, her hands, and the quiet strength she carried with her every day. It was a lesson the assistant had come to appreciate in a way she never could have anticipated. The assistant often found herself reflecting on how far she had come. When she first started at the company, she had been overwhelmed by the sheer scope of the job. The world of business, with its high stakes and endless meetings, was a far cry from her previous experience. But now she realized that there was more to work than just tasks and deadlines. There was connection, there was empathy, and there was the ability to make a difference in someone's life, even in small ways. One afternoon, the billionaire's mother invited the assistant to join her for lunch. It was a rare occasion when the older woman seemed eager to spend time outside of the formal meetings and business discussions. The assistant felt honored knowing that it wasn't just a request, it was a sign of the trust and friendship they had built over time. They met at a quiet cafe near the office. The assistant was surprised by how relaxed the atmosphere felt. There was no rush, no pressure to talk about business or meetings. Instead, the two women sat across from each other, enjoying a peaceful meal together. The assistant had learned that the billionaire's mother wasn't interested in small talk. She didn't need to fill the silence with words. Instead, she communicated with her presence. The way she looked at the assistant, the way her hands moved gently as she signed. The assistant, though still a little nervous at first, found herself settling into the moment. She had learned so much from their past interactions, and now, it felt like they were truly becoming friends. She signed a simple greeting, asking how the billionaire's mother was feeling, and the older woman smiled, signing that she was doing well. As they continued their conversation, the assistant noticed how natural it felt to be with the billionaire's mother. There was no need for the assistant to focus so much on the signs or the structure of the conversation. They had built a rhythm together, one that allowed them to communicate effortlessly even when the words weren't always clear. It was a language of trust, of understanding, of two people who had learned to see each other for who they really were. The lunch was simple, but in that quiet moment, the assistant felt a sense of peace she hadn't realized she was missing. The world outside the cafe seemed distant, as though time had slowed down just for them. As they finished their meal, the billionaire's mother signed a message to the assistant that would stay with her forever. "Thank you for being my friend." The words weren't just a gesture of kindness. They were a profound expression of the bond they had formed. The assistant knew that this moment, this quiet lunch, was more meaningful than anything she had experienced at work before. It wasn't about business, it wasn't about recognition. It was about something far deeper. After that lunch, the assistant felt like she had unlocked something new within herself. She had come to realize that the greatest gift she could offer wasn't her efficiency, her organizational skills, or even her sign language. It was her willingness to be present, to listen, to truly see the people around her. And in doing so, she had built relationships that went beyond the confines of the office. Relationships that were rooted in genuine understanding and respect. As time passed, the assistant's role in the company began to evolve. Her connection with the billionaire's mother had opened doors to new opportunities, not just with her, but with others in the company as well. The assistant's ability to listen, to engage with people on a deeper level, became one of her greatest strengths. She found herself invited to more meetings, consulted on more decisions, and trusted with more responsibilities. But even as her career began to take off, she never lost sight of what mattered most: the human connections she had built. One evening, after a particularly long day, the assistant sat at her desk, going over some notes. She was tired, but in a good way, fulfilled by the work she had done and the relationships she had nurtured. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from the billionaire's mother. It was simple but meaningful. "Thank you," the assistant smiled to herself as she read the message. She had never expected her efforts to be acknowledged in such a direct way, but seeing those words filled her with a sense of warmth. She had made a difference. She had done something that mattered, something that would stay with the billionaire's mother long after the meetings and business dealings had ended. The next day, the assistant received another surprise. The billionaire had called her into his office again. He had a new task for her, one that would require her to work closely with the company's senior leadership team. It was a significant step forward in her career, one that she had dreamed of but never expected to come so soon. But as she walked into the billionaire's office, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for everything that had led her to this point. The billionaire sat behind his desk, his expression serious but kind. "I've been watching your work closely," he began, "and I've been impressed with the way you've built relationships not just with my mother, but with everyone around you. You've proven that you're not just capable, you're trustworthy. I'm offering you a new position, one that will give you more responsibility and more opportunities." The assistant's heart skipped a beat. She had worked hard for this, but hearing it come from the billionaire himself felt surreal. She had come so far since her first day in the office, and now she was being recognized for more than just her technical skills. She was being recognized for her humanity. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I won't let you down," the billionaire smiled. "I know you won't, but remember, it's not just about the work. It's about the people you connect with along the way. Never forget that." As the assistant left his office, she felt a surge of pride. She had come into the company as an outsider, unsure of how she would fit in. But now she was an integral part of the team, not just because of her skills, but because of the relationships she had built. Relationships that were based on understanding, respect, and trust. In the days that followed, the assistant stepped into her new role with confidence. She had learned so much over the past few months, but one lesson stood out above all others: the importance of truly seeing people. In a world that often valued efficiency over empathy, the assistant had discovered that the real success came from the connections you made with others, from the moments when you took the time to understand and support the people around you. Her relationship with the billionaire's mother continued to grow, and they spent more time together outside of the office. They shared meals, exchanged stories, and laughed about the things that only they could understand. What had started as a simple greeting had blossomed into a friendship that was built on mutual respect and a shared sense of understanding. One evening, as the assistant sat at home, reflecting on everything that had happened, she felt a deep sense of contentment. She had found something far more valuable than a promotion or recognition. She had found a deeper connection to the world around her, and to the people who mattered most. The journey had been one of growth, of learning how to communicate in new ways, of finding empathy and connection where she had least expected it. And as she looked ahead, she knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much to learn, so many more people to meet, and countless opportunities to make a difference. But for now, she was content. She had done something meaningful, something that had left an impact, and that, she realized, was the most important thing of all.